start the recording. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen. And I'm just looking for a thumbs up from someone that they can see that. Wonderful. All right. So again, as I said, my name is Dana Lewinter. I am the Director of Municipal Engagement here at CHAPA. Really thank you so much to all of you for being with us today for our regional meeting for the South Shore. This is our last of 8 regional meetings. So we are really excited to be here. We've been compiling thoughts from all of the different regions throughout the summer. And it's been exciting to see some of the themes that have happened and some of the differences among regions. So excited to see what you all are going to be discussing here on the South Shore. First off, we have to thank our regional meeting sponsor, Bank of America, for making these meetings possible across the Commonwealth. It really is important for us to be able to hear and speak with people throughout the Commonwealth throughout the year. And obviously being virtual has made it somewhat easier. We'd love to be in person with you, but thank you to Bank of America for making this an option for us. And of course, thank you to our local co-host, NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. We have Rob Corley and Maureen Fitzgerald joining us, and we'll be hearing from them later on this session. Really excited to hear what they're up to there. So just a little bit about who we are at CHAPA. We are a statewide affordable housing organization, and we encourage the production and preservation of homes that are affordable to households with low and moderate incomes, and we work to foster diverse and sustainable neighborhoods through planning and community development. For more than 50 years, we have been advocating for opportunity at the local, state, and federal levels. We've been working to expand access to housing through our coordination of the Massachusetts Homeownership Collaborative. We monitor thousands of affordable homes across the state. We administer the Mass Access website, which is now the Housing Navigator. We're really excited with the launch of that just in the last couple of weeks. And we also work to develop the affordable housing field through trainings and forums, our Young Professionals Network. And we also run a mentorship program with the Mel King Institute. So kind of a wide breadth of what we do at CHAPA. But ultimately what we do at CHAPA is bring together a broad group of stakeholders. And we do this because we believe that together we can build a better future for everyone in the Commonwealth. This is something we've always done in Massachusetts, shaping the future we want for ourselves. But the affordable housing challenges facing our state really put us at risk of losing the very things that make Massachusetts so great. And in the last year, of course, the urgency of the COVID pandemic and racial injustices really demand that we rethink who we are and what we want to be as a Commonwealth. We know that the decisions we make today will determine our future, and if we do them well, we can ensure every person can find an affordable home in the community of their choice. So there are big challenges ahead. We're going to be talking about many of them today, but we also want to hear from you because we know our goals are achievable if we can all work together. So I'm really excited for our agenda today. First, we're going to hear from the CHAPA policy team about some state, federal updates and priorities. We're also going to hear about CHAPA's fair housing efforts, which we've reinvigorated in the last year, and I'll be speaking about our municipal engagement initiative model. And then we're going to hear from our regional co-sponsor, NeighborWorks Housing Solutions, on some of the challenges and opportunities they see for the region. And lastly, we're going to make sure we hear from you. You all know your communities better than anyone else, so we'll be looking to you to share your challenges and strategies and concerns so that we can all learn together. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Abhi, to get us started on some state updates.
Thank you so much, Dana. Great to see you all here. And we are excited about a lot of things happening in affordable housing sector. And just around the legislation and budget side, we wanted to share some updates on what has happened and what are CHAPA's plans in terms of legislative and budget advocacy in the coming months. So just to go over quickly, a big thing that happened over the last session or early this year was the housing choice getting passed. That was one of the significant changes to the state's zoning law, Chapter 40A, and which passed through the Economic Development Bill as a part of housing choice and few other provisions that that were a part of this. The objective was, and CHAPA proposed many of the changes that are included in that bill, was to make sure that we are looking at transportation and housing and just integrating the whole thing in terms of smart growth, making sure that communities are opening up to allow for more development that makes sure that we are having people from all from all over to have a home in the communities that they choose to. So that was the objective, and with that we are happy that some of the barriers that were existing due to a lot of previous policies that existed around segregation and just keeping people out, some of those barriers have been lifted through this legislation. And so we are really glad that this has passed, and we now look forward to how communities can make use of this tool in terms of increasing their or looking at developments for in their own communities. So this change applies to all towns except Boston, and it's currently in effect. It provides zoning ordinances or bylaws by a simple majority vote instead of a 2/3 majority. We knew that many developments were not going through simply because of literally losing by 2 or 3 votes, and so this would really help those developments go forward. In terms of what the law does, it basically does 3 things. As I said, it lowers from a supermajority to simple majority only for certain zoning ordinances in relation to smart growth. It allows for a new multifamily zoning requirement for MBTA specific municipalities that have access to some kind of MBTA, as that's specified, and also makes some other changes to streamline permitting and makes a better appeals reform. We knew that there were many cases where few neighbors were able to stop developments, and so this this addresses that issue in a few ways. So the big thing, I know there was a question that was already put up in the chat that DHCD is going to issue guidance, and we are waiting on it too, because as somebody rightly pointed out, there are some words and things in that which can go either way depending on how the guidance comes out. What we are hopeful about is that DHCD is taking input from many places before putting out the guidance, and so we would definitely we are definitely looking at doing more outreach and awareness and just education once the guidance is out. But yes, we are also waiting for the guidance to be out. And this is just, we have put in slides here on like the specifics of the law. I'm not gonna go into too many details about that, but we also have a lot of links in terms of getting an overview and also getting more specific about the law. These are just some things that we put on the slide if anybody wants to refer to that, but just quickly going through it, it allows for certain kinds of housing by right with a simple majority, multifamily in a mixed use and eligible location. What counts as there is a definition for eligible location, but we definitely need more guidance to get more clarity on that. Allows by right with simple majority for ADUs and some open space residential, also allowing for certain kinds of housing developments by special permits. I'm going to quickly run through that because I have a lot to cover. Next slide, Dana. Also, MBTA communities, this one, CHAPA has been advocating for this particular section for many years now, and we are really happy that this has gone forward. It's a new section that, enables communities to have at least one zoning district of reasonable size in which multifamily is permitted by right. Again, what counts as reasonable size is something that we will need the help of the DHCD's guidance to really start working on that. But there are, it does give requirements in terms of what the district is needed to have. And the one great thing about this law was municipalities were not just given an incentive, but there's also a downside if you do not follow these things, and wherein the community is ineligible for grants like housing choice grants, local capital project funds, and mass works. So it really pushes communities to think about development and make their plans to open up for housing, affordable housing. This is just a map of which communities come under the MBTA ones. Next slide. And there are more resources for in-depth information over this, but I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has right now. building over this, we are also looking at, and this is what happened in the last session, which extended, into this year. But looking forward in this session, we have the budget and the legislative timelines going on. In terms of the budget, we are really happy that there have been some increases in our state's rental voucher programs. Our efforts now are focused on making sure all of that money that is allocated is actually getting spent out in terms of new vouchers, because that is something that was a challenge over the last couple of years, because we had a lot of funds from those programs left over in this year. So our efforts are going to be to ensure that there is no more leftover funds and that we are using all of the money that is put out. And so we are working with the administration to ensure that there are a lot more new vouchers that are being put out for these programs. And also we are happy to see increased funding for public housing over the last 2 sessions, because that was seriously underfunded. And we are also looking forward to getting ARPA funds distributed, wherein a lot of these things would be funded through, for example, capital improvements for public housing is something that we are looking at, but we are happy to see the state is also prioritizing that in their own state budget. Also, to give a quick update, the budget process is complete. We have a budget for FY 2022, but at some point, not too far away, but we would soon be starting to plan for the next year's FY 2023 budget. And so please be on the lookout for any of those updates. In terms of the state legislation, things are moving forward. We already have had a couple of hearings on some of our priority legislation, our main one being housing production bill. It basically is our main production bill, building on the housing choice to ensure that whatever tools we have through the housing choice, we are building over that, we are adding to that, because that cannot be the end all solution, but that's just one step forward, and we want to keep building on that momentum. And so this bill basically sets an affordable housing production goal in addition to the housing goal that we have. Also requires multifamily housing around public transportation across all of Massachusetts and not just the MBTA communities, and also allows accessory dwelling units by right instead of the simple majority that exists right now. Also, so it's just building upon these things. We hope you are able to support this legislation. If you want to submit a testimony, because we just had a bill hearing on that, please reach out to us and we can help you with that. We are also looking at strengthening some of our housing programs like the mass rental voucher program by codifying it. Right now it is only existing in the state budget. So making sure that we are prioritizing these programs from the state revenue, and also strengthening them and making sure they are formed in a way, or they are established in a way that that the participants, for them, it is easier to access these programs, and also it really helps reduce rent burden on them. Another piece of legislation that we are supporting is the right to counsel to help address the eviction crisis. This basically ensures legal representation for residents with low income facing eviction, because there has been a huge imbalance in who gets legal representation during eviction cases, because it's usually heavily landlords that have legal representation while tenants don't. And so this would help make that balance and really address eviction crisis and also the racial equity issue in that. There is a whole host of things that we have been doing. I'm just touching up. Whitney is going to be talking about some of our fair house as well, but we are also looking at restoring our public housing to create more resources for public housing redevelopment projects. And so allowing housing authorities to leverage new and additional resources for rehab of and redevelopment projects for public housing, because our public housing stock at this point is becoming old, and we need a lot of resources for renovating and rehab of those. And also looking at long-term revenue for affordable housing. It's really great that ARPA funds are going to be, infusing a lot of money into housing, but and hopefully that is what we have been advocating for as well. But we also want to make sure that we have some long-term revenue resources, and we are creating those resources to make the affordable housing numbers work. And so this bill looks at increasing the deeds excise for buying and selling of property. And so this is just one of the things we have been looking at, but we want to look at the whole picture and make sure we are prioritizing production, resources, and also strengthening the existing programs for making sure tenant that we are supporting tenants and looking at their needs as well. So this is a quick overview. I'm going to pass it on to Ryan to talk about our federal stuff and ARPA. Oh, sorry, I forgot this. I always forget about this one. And just a quick plug-in for a change in the housing leadership that has been there. We are really excited to have Senator Keenan and Rep. Arciero to be the chair of Housing Committee. We know for the longest time we had Rep. Honan as the House chair, and some phenomenal work, but we're also really excited to see the two new chairs, and we are going to be looking forward, and we are already working with them, and we are really looking forward to engage with them, and we would encourage all of you to also reach out to them and make sure that we are having a dialogue and we are bringing forth our local issues and our local solutions to the forefront to help policy and strategy. So with that was just one plug, and I'm going to pass it on to Ryan. For any questions, I'm happy to take any questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you, B. Again, I'm Ryan Dominguez. I'm a policy analyst at CHAPA, and I help to manage all of the federal policies that we oversee. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the funds that are coming in from the American Rescue Plan Act, which you may also see referred to as ARPA. So back in March, President Biden passed ARPA, which brought billions of dollars to Massachusetts, including a number of resources that can be used for housing. And on this first slide, you'll see the first bucket of funding, which is the fiscal recovery funds. These are funds that are pretty flexible, and you'll see that Massachusetts received around $5.3 billion in fiscal recovery funds, while cities, towns, and counties received up to $3.4 billion directly. So in total, we have around $8 billion in fiscal recovery funds. These funds can be specifically used to support everything from public health, lost revenue, infrastructure, and of course, housing. And you may have seen a few months ago that the governor came out with a plan for these funds, which includes around $1 billion for housing. It was $500 million for home ownership and around $500 million for rental housing production. And in recent weeks, the state legislature has started to have a hearing about how to use some of these funds. And they actually had one specifically on housing and labor and workforce development. And specifically to some of the housing priorities at CHAPA, we are pushing for increased resources. So we do support the governor's plan for $1 billion for housing, but we're asking for an additional $683 million to bring the total of ARPA funding going towards housing to 1.683. I'm going to put a link in the chat now that has an outline of some of those priorities and what we want to see some of those go towards housing. And then on the next slide, you'll see that some of your local cities and towns have also received some of these fiscal recovery funds directly. You'll see that Plymouth received around $9 million, Quincy received around $45 million, and Weymouth received around $17 million. And then you'll see a couple of your counties, including Norfolk and Plymouth, have received excess of $100 million. You'll see also that there's a non-entitlement community bucket. And if you don't see your city and town on the sheet that is actually included on this slide, then they're probably one of the non-entitlement communities, and the state will be kind of distributing some of that money directly to your city or town. So, with that said, cities and towns have a lot of say on what their funding actually goes to. And, you as local advocates can really try to become part of that process and ask for your city or town, whether that's the city managers, whether it's the city council, to try to use some of that funding towards housing. And throughout the whole document, I put through, some of the eligible uses for these funds. So please try to reference the Treasury guidance when you're putting together your specific requests for that. So So in terms of just a general overview of what you can use this for in terms of housing, you can use it to advocate for rent, mortgage, or utility assistance, counseling or legal aid to prevent evictions, affordable housing development, as well as services to address homelessness, such as supportive housing. So included in the whole ARPA package, if you go to the next slide, there are a number of other housing resources that are available. The first one are the emergency housing vouchers, which are basically Section 8 vouchers that are specifically focused on people who are experiencing homelessness or suffering from housing instability, or maybe victims of domestic violence. So you'll see that we received around 1,700 in the state, and the majority of that went to DHCD, around 900 of those, but Quincy Housing Authority also received 24. So I would reach out to DHCD or your local housing authority if you know somebody who falls under one of these three kind of emergency buckets, and ask if you can get one of those housing vouchers for that family. You also see that there's home funding that is going to use to create housing and provide supportive services for those who are experiencing homelessness or maybe at risk of experiencing homelessness. And these funds, specifically Quincy received $3 million in home funding, and non-entitlement dollars were around 36 million. So there'll be a lot of money that's coming from the state to those local cities and towns for this purpose as well. And then finally, there's the Homeowners Assistance Fund, which helps the people to pay mortgages and utility costs. And that's really geared towards people who are, small landlords or just, their own homeowners who may be struggling with this kind of loss of income or something like that. This kind of funding can help them to avoid foreclosure kind of moving forward. And then on the last slide, you'll see that the biggest tranche of money that we've received is emergency rental assistance, which will help people to kind of stay in their homes. Massachusetts has created a lot of great programs, including RAFT, IRMA, and SHIRA, which are going to both tenants as well as property owners to really help people to stay in their homes. And you'll see that Plymouth received a lot of money directly for IRMA. And, it's really just kind of pertinent that we get as much of this funding out as possible. So anytime that you as a community organization can kind of get the word out and help people to fill out applications, that'll go a long way in terms of making sure that we keep people housed. So on the next page, you'll see that the state actually created a housing resource and guidance page for all of the COVID-19 resources that are coming in from the federal government. Here, people can find out where they can find a lawyer to represent them in court if they do receive an eviction filing, or there's some information there on how to apply for the rental assistance that is available. So I would definitely pass around that information. And then on the last side, gives you some information on how you can get involved as your local advocates. Again, you can reach out to your state legislature. You can also reach out to your local elected officials in your city and town to try to get housing resources from the ARPA funds. And then also you can join one of our committees to really give your voice to some of the policies that we're going to be trying to push over the next year or so. And with that, I will pass it along to my colleague Lily, who can talk a little bit about fair housing.
And just one quick question that I see in the chat for you, Ryan, before we move on. I assume this is referring to all of the ARPA funds, but the question is there a formal process for towns to follow on how they're going to use the funds, like a public input or hearing or anything like that?
Yeah, so there's not any kind of regulation out there that says like you have to have a public process or this is the way that you're supposed to do this. So I think it's really prudent that you as a local advocate can get involved, contact your local legislature or your local city council or city manager and ask and request for there to be a public kind of comment period or process so that you can have input as advocates kind of on the ground. So from city to city, it's going to be a little bit different of a process, but the more public input that I think we can have, I think the greater impact we can have towards putting some of these funds towards housing.
Yes, and I will just put in a plug that we did a session a couple of weeks ago on using ARPA funds at the local level. Ryan shared some fabulous information that's recorded, and you can find that on our website. And we're also going to be sharing some additional materials to help people think about this at the local level as well. Thank you, Ryan. All right, so with that, we're going to hand it off to Lily, not Whitney, who sends her regards. She wasn't able to make it today, but Lily will take it from here with our Fair Housing Initiative.
Hello, yes, my name is Lily Link. I'm the Municipal Engagement Program Associate, and today I am in the role of Whitney Demetrius. So forgive me, I'm going to be reading off of some notes because this is not my area of expertise. And with that caveat, if there are questions that come up for you as I'm speaking, please do still put them into the chat. It's possible someone else here will be able to answer it. And if none of us are able to answer it, then we'll pass it along to Whitney. So I'm going to start with some good news. There are three big important changes that have come down from the Biden administration in regards to fair housing, which are redressing discriminatory housing practices, expanding our definition of sex discrimination, and reinstating affirmatively furthering fair housing. So if you want to go to the next slide. At the very beginning of his administration, President Biden issued an executive order to our new HUD Secretary, Marcia Fudge, about redressing our federal government's history of discriminatory housing practices. And this is a really important first step towards remedying the patterns of segregation and discrimination that still persist today. This also set a clear tone from the very outset of the Biden administration that they're going to take a very different tack from the previous administration, which had rescinded the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. Additionally, just a few weeks after Biden put out that first executive order, he released another memo on sex discrimination in February of this year, which really expanded sex as a protected class to also include sexual orientation and gender identity, which is a really important change because even though here in Massachusetts we have sexual orientation as part of our statewide protected classes, this has not been true at the federal level previously. For anyone who wants a quick refresher, the federally protected classes include race, color, national origin, religion, familial status, disability, and sex. And sex now includes sexual orientation and gender, whereas before it was really just the male-female binary. And here in Massachusetts, we have additional protected classes for things like age, marital status, veteran status, et cetera. But this is not true nationally. And last but not least, the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule has been restored. There was a comment period during the month of July, which has now ended, and the final rule is in place as of a few weeks ago. And that's about as much information as I have on that. And so despite all this good news, we still know that there is a lot more to do. And so I'm going to tell you about three of our legislative priorities here at CHAPA, put together by our policy team. And also these priorities were chosen with lots of input from our many partners, and maybe even some of you here who are on this call. And so these priorities focus on prohibiting exclusionary zoning, affirmatively furthering fair housing, and fair housing disparate impact standard. So you can see here the first one prohibits restrictive land use, zoning, and permitting decisions that perpetuate segregation, and it prohibits discrimination against affordable housing developments or housing that is suitable for families with young children. The affirmatively furthering fair housing creates a statewide duty to affirmatively further fair housing and create inclusive communities, as well as creates a commission to establish how communities must meet their duties to further fair housing. And lastly, the Fair Housing Disparate Impact Standard creates a statewide disparate impact standard to protect people against housing discrimination. So we've covered the federal and state levels, but you may be wondering, what can you do at the local level in terms of furthering fair housing? So on this slide, there are opportunities to get involved across the state at many different levels through fair housing commissions and committees, and also as part of broader diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So some of these opportunities include things like education and outreach, direct assistance to tenants and folks who are affected, as well as local and state policy advocacy. And so if you are interested in joining a fair housing committee, you could certainly start your own within your organization or your municipality, but we also have one right here at CHAPA. So the Fair Housing Committee has just recently been revitalized under Whitney's leadership. If any of you were at the South Shore Regional meeting last year, a lot has happened since then, of course, but one of those things is Whitney's promotion to Director of Fair Housing Engagement, which has really enabled us to put more energy and focus into those efforts. So the Fair Housing Committee is revitalized. We're meeting again, and it's a great place if you're looking for, if you want to learn more about fair housing, connect with other housing practitioners, to hear what other folks are doing in neighboring cities and towns. You can be a part of helping us to shape future legislation. Folks at all levels of experience and all different kinds of backgrounds are part of our Fair Housing Committee. And so if that's interesting to you, we really hope that you will join. And I'll share some links as soon as I'm done talking about where you can find that information. So what you can do right now, this is a quick review. You can join a local effort. You can establish or revitalize or expand a local fair housing committee or commission, or you can join ours. You can contact your local municipal officials and decision makers, particularly right now with as we just spoke about with ARPA, there's a lot of money on the table. And lastly, contact your state legislator about those 3 pieces of fair housing legislation that I mentioned earlier. So I'm gonna drop a bunch of links now into the chat, and I'm going to turn it over to Dana, who's gonna talk about the Municipal Engagement Initiative.
Thank you, Lily. And thank you for stepping in. You did a fabulous job, and we're really excited for all the fair housing work that we're able to do at CHAPA. And the fair housing work also, Lily talked a lot about the legislative pieces of it, but a lot of it falls within our municipal engagement initiative and what we're doing at the local level. So I just want to share with you a little bit about what that program is and what we do and why we do it and how you may be able to get involved. So we kind of grew out of this idea of what happens at the local level. So there's a great report. If you go to housingpolitics.com, you can learn a little bit more about it, but some researchers at BU, Catherine Einstein, David Glick, and Maxwell Palmer, dug into essentially what they call this idea of neighborhood defenders, and essentially who shows up to public meetings when we're talking about housing. And they poured through meeting minutes when housing was on the agenda, and they compared commenters at those public meetings to voters in those same communities. And what they found was that commenters were disproportionately white, male, older, and more likely to be homeowners. And generally, they were speaking in opposition to new housing and particularly affordable housing. And so this was really persistent across all types of cities. This was for the greater Boston. I think it was 97 communities in greater Boston, but we also asked them to dig into this data for us in the Springfield area, and they found the same held true there. So it's pretty consistent across communities. And what happens is people go to public meetings, especially in highly desirable neighborhoods, to oppose new housing. And so it means there's not enough supply in those communities because we're not creating the housing that is needed. And as a result, it will often push development into less affluent communities, which can lead to gentrification and displacement. And it becomes this cycle that we get stuck in. And so what that looks like on the ground as you're driving or walking around your community, it probably looks something like this. These signs saying, we don't want this in our community, stop this type of development, no to this in our neighborhoods. And if you don't see these signs in your community, go on your local Facebook page or your local newsletters, you'll probably hear some of this kind of sentiment there as well. And we at the Municipal Engagement Initiative want to move from an attitude like this to an attitude like this, where people are asking for us to protect and expand our affordable housing rather than saying no to it. But what we know is community support really can make or break that at the local level. And so many communities across the Commonwealth don't have a strategy or a coalition to build that local support. That's where our Municipal Engagement Initiative comes in. So we work in local communities throughout the Commonwealth, a real range of types of communities to really support the efforts there, essentially to change the culture to one that welcomes housing, particularly affordable housing. We want to bolster the existing efforts that are already there and then grow the number of people that are supporting production in each community. So we do this through a pretty well-developed strategy now. We have what we call our MEI Lite Toolkit, which you can definitely check out. It's on our website. We've been making some updates to it over the last couple of weeks as well. But it has sample agendas and stakeholder lists and coalition building activities. But really what we're trying to do is build this big tent of stakeholders, bring together as many people, not just your usual suspects, but as many people as we can from the community to have conversations about housing. So what we do is we start with a core group of people. We start to identify these other partners. And when I say partners, it's, you know, people who are concerned with environmental standards in their communities, people who are looking at transit, people who do food justice work, or people who are working with seniors. All of those people, we want to be part of these conversations. We dig into data. We usually have a big launch event or meeting, and then we slowly grow over time, and our coalitions take various actions, whether it's supporting the creation of a new affordable housing trust, or passage of by right accessory dwelling units, or allocation of more money for affordable housing. Each community kind of takes their own path to those new strategies. When I talk to people about what this looks like, it is a very involved process. It's a lot of talking and conversations and messaging and getting the right people in the room and organizing. But that doesn't mean that you can't do anything in the meantime while you're getting to that point of having a strong coalition. Because ultimately with us at CHAPA, what we want to do is be able to walk away from communities we're working with and know there is a organized coalition that will continue this work. But while you're getting to that point, or even before you think about getting to that point, there's plenty that we know you can and ask you to do in your local communities. So first, we would ask you to dig into your local housing data. We always recommend folks go to DataTown, which was created by our friends over at MHP. It's a great tool to look at, you know, who's cost burdened in your community, what are their housing costs, how do you compare to your neighboring communities? Always encourage folks to meet with your local planners and elected officials to understand the climate in your community around housing. They may be hearing from people who have specific needs, or they might be hearing specific concerns, and it's really important to open those lines of communication. Most importantly, we want you to show up to public meetings and speak up for more housing and more affordability. So if we go back to my first slide that I talked about, where we know people are showing up to meetings and speaking out in opposition, we need to counter that. We need you to get to your public meetings and say, actually, I support this. I need more of this in my community. This is what I want in order to make this an inclusive community, or make it so that seniors can downsize, or families can grow here, or our economy can thrive. And certainly to push back against mis and exclusionary language. So this looks like sometimes you'll be in a meeting and someone will say, you know, I'm all for affordable housing, but our school system can't possibly handle more kids. Or I'm all for affordable housing, but the traffic that this will bring, we just can't handle it here in our community. That's exclusionary, and, you know, not beyond what some fair housing implications there might be about making zoning decisions around protected classes like families with children. What it means is it's saying we don't want these things here, not that we can't find solutions to make more room for more people. And so pushing back against that and saying, you know, actually our schools, we've seen a decline in school population over the last 10 years, or we have the ability to move around our budgets and make this work, or we love this, but can we do some traffic mitigation in order to make it move forward? It's really important that you speak up against some of those common myths. There's always room for educational forums. I think it's really important. A lot of people just don't understand all the tools and the resources at their disposal to tackle these problems. And last but certainly not least is really to listen to people with the deepest affordability concerns in your community. You know, often we're talking about permitting affordable housing or permitting more housing opportunities, but the people who will ultimately live in those developments or ultimately benefit from those developments aren't in the room for those conversations. It's either because they don't yet live in your community because they don't have the opportunity to, or maybe they just haven't been brought into the conversation. But when people with the deepest affordability concerns speak, it's really important to listen to them, because they know firsthand, their lived experience, what they need in order to make it in your community. So with that, I'm just going to pause there and hand it off to our partners at NeighborWorks Housing Solutions to share a little bit about what they're seeing on the South Shore. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll invite, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have Rob Corley and Maureen Fitzgerald here from NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. And I think Rob is going to go ahead and present now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody hear me okay? And I'm going to try to share here and make sure, get a thumbs up if you can see my screen. All right, very good. First, I want to thank CHAPA for all their incredible work. That's quite a deck you just went through, a tremendous amount of information. We greatly appreciate everything that you do year round, and this is a very, very important time to get involved. So I appreciate all that you're doing in regards to this outreach. So I have a deck here. I'll go through a little bit here. Let me see if I can get this to move forward for me. There it is. Okay. A brief overview of NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. So we serve the South Shore, South Coast, Plymouth, Bristol County, Norfolk counties. And we've been around for more than 40 years. I won't tell you how long I've been around, but I've been around. We have offices in Brockton, Kingston, New Bedford, Taunton, and Quincy. So we cover quite a large region here. Some of the lines of business that I have here, and I'll go into some detail about how they've been performing recently with some of the federal funds that we've been receiving. But we, of course, do real estate development. We do mixed income developments, mixed use, special needs, and homeless housing and shelter development. We also have in-house property management and resident services. We have a family domestic violence shelter. We provide home base. We also provide construction and management and owner rep services to other nonprofit partners that we have in the region. We have many HUD certified counselors. We have a housing consumer education center here that provides financial coaching, foreclosure prevention, home buyer education, reverse mortgage or HECM counseling, and much more. We are a CDFI, so we do lending and technical assistance for home buyers, homeowners, and small businesses. Out of housing resources, you saw some of them, or some of them were mentioned already, that we provide here in the region are RAFT, ERAP, and IRMA, and rental assistance for tenants, landlords, and homeowners. And then, of course, we have a leased housing department where we have Section 8 vouchers, MRVPs, and project-based subsidies. So that's sort of a brief overview of some of the lines of business that we have here in the region. I did want to dive into a few of them a little bit. And of course, on the homelessness prevention side of things, or eviction prevention, there are a number of programs that have received federal money, local money, and state money since this crisis started. And of course, that's RAFT, IRMA, ERAP, and our HCEC department. And to focus in on some of the rental assistance a little bit, we have, since March, we've been processing between 800,000 to 1.2 million a week in rental assistance and homeowner assistance, but primarily rental assistance. We see on average still around 300 to 350 applications a week. And now roughly about 80% of our funding is coming from ERAP funds. Prior to that, it was a combination of a variety of other different things, including state funding. And that was all brought in through RAFT. RAFT was an existing program before COVID came along. We have a great network of partner agencies that help us assist people with applications and processing of those applications, including some of them, Cape Verdean Association, PACE or Jobs, BAMSI, Father Bills and Mainspring, Pro Homes. We have a great network of organizations here in the region, and we've all come together to try to help as many people as we can during this time. And that has been, all year, really, not just since March. We've been providing funding since last July. We're the first organization in the state to recently implement the new central application, which all regionals will now be using, I think by the end of September, for applications. We've been up and running with that for 3 weeks now. It's going well, but it's certainly been a challenge for our team. And access has always been an issue here. When the pandemic hit, a lot of this we had to digitize and go virtual with everything we were offering. but we never want that to be a barrier for folks to get the assistance that they need. So starting in September on the 17th, we're now that we have Central App up and running, we're going to offer in-person application assistance with 50 or so virtual and in-person stations at the Shaw Center. And we're going to roll that out into additional areas in New Bedford, Taunton, and Fall River in the coming weeks following that. And language access is the issue that we're focusing on there for sure. So majority bilingual processors and assistants there and volunteers and so on, including some of our board members and everything else and partners. Moving on to real estate development. So at NeighborWorks, I won't go too much into detail here. We have about 900 units in our portfolio. We have 300 that are in our pipeline right now. So we have a lot going on, a lot of production. And again, this is serving primarily low-income families, seniors, veterans, people with disabilities. We do special needs housing. So you can see here, we do some quite large LIHTC type projects, but we also do smaller projects for veterans and folks with special needs. The properties, again, if we have are 1, 2 families, 3 families, and large apartment buildings, they're kind of all over the map. Typically, the special needs ones are smaller. We also provide, as I mentioned earlier, construction management owner rep services. And currently we're doing that for the creation of 3 homeless shelters in the region and over 100 housing first units. So housing first for extremely low income folks or the homeless. So with some of the federal money that ARPA in particular that has come in, that was mentioned earlier, like for example, in some of the communities, they receive more home funds from ARPA or a significant amount. And we've been able to capitalize on that and have, brought in about $3 million in ARPA funding into some of our existing deals and some that we're able to launch. So I picked a few of them here. One of them is the Sycamore in Maine in Brockton. This is the 48 units of workforce housing. That we were able to fill in a gap on construction overruns and costs during this period. And we're able to bring in some ARPA/home funds or to that project, which was great. It's leasing up on September 1st. People are moving in. That project is actually complete. Holbrook Senior Center or senior housing with the senior center. Again, this is closed and coming out of the ground, actually starting in 2 weeks, but it had a major construction gap, construction cost gap created by construction cost overruns. So we were able to use ARPA funds there. A similar situation on Lower Winter Street in Quincy, where we had a project that again is starting next month. It's closed and ready to go, or soon to be closed, I should say, and ready to go. But it had, when we got our pricing, it was just on the moon, and we were able to use some of that funding to fill that gap. And then lastly here, Montello Street in Brockton, this is right on top of the Campello commuter rail station. So it's TOD and Housing Choice. It's not because of Housing Choice, but this is a project that's in round right now, and the COVID lightning round, as DHD has called it. We were able to take significant ARPA funds to fill our stack here to make this project even possible. And we should hopefully hear about that soon. So we're excited. That's the first project we're able to sort of get off the ground or fill a gap with these new monies. We've had some very positive things too. The Sycamore in Maine, which I mentioned, we had a grand opening there, ribbon cutting in late June. It was a very hot day. As you remember, June was hot, but it was dry. The mayor was instrumental in keeping this project going during the pandemic. We were able to keep construction going forward safely, and we're able to complete, not on time, but they're never on time, so I can't blame anything than that. But we were thrilled that day to have a lot of the electeds and so on. This was workforce housing again. You see Crystal Cornegay there from Mass Housing. Mass Housing was a major funder for this particular project. And you see there's also a retail component right there on Main Street in Brockton. Leased housing, wanted to highlight a few things here. At NeighborWorks, we are the largest rental assistance provider in the region. We have 2,900 households in our portfolio. And there are some special programs there for formerly homeless individuals and young adults coming out of foster care, et cetera. We also have some wraparound, what we call economic advancement programs like family self-sufficiency and snowmass. These programs are really important and actually as part of our strategic planning, things that we're really trying to grow or improve on or add more of. And also we have 400 or over 400 project-based vouchers in our portfolio, and that is growing as the state continues to put out more vouchers. Some of the highlights here based on some of the newer things that are happening and that were actually just mentioned. We were, for the first time in 15 years, we opened up our MRVP waiting list. We had a lottery for 210 vouchers. We had over 4,000 applications. And that was over a period of about 3 weeks. So just incredible demand for subsidy or vouchers. Some of the economic advancement programs that we're working on in this department are, again, a great partnership with Harbor One Bank, one of our greatest partners, a credit builder loan program that we're advancing there for family self-sufficiency participants. It's a program that we're launching and piloting with them, and DHCD is providing some of the collateral for the loans, and we're hoping that that will grow. Also, we've partnered before with the One Family. We're doing it again, and this time it's for Credentials to Career. This is a program sponsored by Signature Care Health, and it provides our participants with training in cohorts to build resumes, some workforce training, and establishing credentials. And Signature is not only sponsoring it, but they're potentially providing jobs. They have over 100 jobs that they're looking to fill, and we feel like there's a direct line of connection there. So we're very excited about that. One Family is a great partner. And then, as was mentioned earlier, DHCD has about 900 or so new federal emergency housing vouchers, and we've been allocated to administer 102 of those here in the region. So from the subsidy side of things, you can see between the 210 new MRVPs, 100 or so in the new federal vouchers, and then again, the increase in the project base that haven't seen this in a while. Well, you know, we have almost 400 new vouchers in the region, which is wonderful, but still not near enough when you see 4,000 applications come in 3 weeks. We opened a new office in Taunton. That was another thing. And yes, I'm wearing the same suit. It was all in July, and it's the only suit that still fits me post-COVID. And you got to get your eyes shot out with a button there if I move too quickly. But this was a great day, another warm day in Taunton. It wasn't the same day, but the same suit. The mayor was great. She was excellent that day. We were very excited. This is a great location right downtown in the Church Green. And Taunton, like all the gateway cities in our region, their small businesses have suffered tremendously over the last year. The city has stepped up and is again trying to create more home ownership. We were awarded a down payment assistance contract with the city for through our CDFI, which is great. And we're working with the local business community there to provide microloans and some assistance as they try to recover. To that point, on our CDFI, I had some things here I wanted to highlight because again, it's newer money. You see here the Brockton Beer Company that will be located at the first floor of the Sycamore Main. And again, you see Pierre here, one of the owners in the photo next door, a great group of local Brocktonians that came together to start this company that's booming. We're very happy to be part of their financing and helping them get launched here, not only in our space, but with funding from our CDFI. But through Mass Growth Capital, we were recently awarded $1.25 million. It requires a match, which we're going to get from the feds, but 855 of that is capital for small business lending, which we intend on rolling out across the region. And again, $95,000, I should say, is for planning funding, and $300,000 in grants for small businesses, straight up grants, which is great because businesses don't just need loans, they need some grants, right? And so we're excited about that. And we also reapplied for technical assistance, which we received last year, another $85,000. We hope to hear about that soon. On the national level, as you may have heard, like other federal programs, the CDFI program at the national level has received a tremendous amount of money. And we were recently awarded $1.5 million from their Rapid Response Fund, which is great and timely. And again, 1.3 of that is direct loan capital, which is wonderful. And it's very flexible. It can be used for residential and small business. So we can try to target some home ownership and again, some micro lending and so on for small businesses. And then we have an application into the CDFI FA fund or financial assistance fund for $700,000. And we're hoping that that comes in and will be part of the match that we offer in the 25% for Mass Growth Capital. So that's sort of what's going on with some of those programs. And again, we're very grateful to CHAPA. We think in the state of Massachusetts, we have the best housing ecosystem in the country. And from an advocacy standpoint, I'm sure of that. Being part of the National NeighborWorks network, I used to travel a lot, but used to see what goes on across the country. And we're very lucky here to have CHAPA leading, and again, MACDC and RHN. It takes everybody here to advance all of the programs and all the needs that we have. But a couple of things I just wanted to mention is we say down here that we had an affordable housing crisis and emergency before the pandemic, a major one, and the pandemic has only made it that much worse. We need a huge increase and a fundamental shift in the resources that are dedicated to affordable housing and subsidy in our region. As was demonstrated, the money is here. There's billions of dollars here right now. So now is the time to advocate for those funds and make sure that we're capturing them here for this region. Home ownership production is something that's near and dear to us, but we don't have the tools to do it. The Commonwealth Builder Program doesn't work in gateway cities for us. The construction cost is still as high as anywhere else, like in Boston and Cambridge. It doesn't get cheaper just because you go outside 128. It's the same price, but the purchase prices are so much lower that the subsidy isn't enough. So without huge subsidies, we cannot produce home ownership units in our region, which is a real problem. Also, economic advancement programs, production, subsidy, affordable housing, emergency assistance, but we need to do more to advance our families, move them forward, provide them with financial independence. And those programs, this again is an opportunity to start funding those type of programs. And then our sort of fear or challenge maybe to say is, all this money, not only the money that's on the table, as was mentioned, but the money that has come in, that's sort of propping up the rental market and a lot of families. We're very concerned about when the money is gone and what the cliff effect will be in our region when this money is no longer here. So are we really preparing for a post-pandemic housing crisis when the money is gone? And what does that look like? And that's not only homeowners that may be facing foreclosure and forbearance and deferment issues, but literally the entire housing market, or a good portion of it, like I said, millions of dollars a week we're putting out. And this time next year, we're going to start to see the impacts of when all that money is gone. So this is the moment, this is the time, and I appreciate CHAPA leaning in and leading the charge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. I'm struck every time I hear someone from NeighborWorks Housing Solutions speak by how much you guys do and how far-reaching your impact is. And I think that last question that you just asked is so important. We're going to kind of go from here into an open discussion with all of you. We want to hear what you're thinking, what you're facing, what challenges you're coming out of over the past year, and what you're hoping to do in the coming years, and how we can be partners in that. So I'm going to open it all up to you, but I think that's a good jumping off point, that last question that you asked of what can we do and how do we use this moment and this momentum that we have right now, all the emphasis that we've had on the real critical role that housing plays in all of our lives and keeping us safe and keeping us stable as we move into the next phase of this year. How do we use the opportunity of all the money that's at our disposal right now to set ourselves up for something better going forward? So thank you again, Rob, for your presentation, and I'll open it up to all of you. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat. You can raise your virtual hand, you can just unmute yourself or raise your actual hand, but I'd love to hear from all of you. What are you experiencing right now in your communities, and how can we work with you to address any challenges? It always takes folks a second to pull their thoughts together after all of the presentation, but I could pose a more specific question. Are folks thinking about how they'll be spending their ARPA funds at the local level yet? Or are folks thinking about how they're responding to production right now? Are folks seeing any delays in production or anything that you think is coming down the pike from the changes through housing choice and the MBTA communities legislation? What are you guys all experiencing in your communities? We have a quiet group today. Anna, are you interested in speaking?
Yes. Hi. So my name is Anna Robertson. I work for Boston Medical Center, but I work in complex care management, which actually goes from Boston to the South and all like the clinics and everything like that. So my question is, the vouchers that are being distributed by DHCD, and it was just said that they had 102 at NeighborWorks housing solution. How are those going to be allocated? Because from my information I received, it was like mostly for people that are in shelters, and there's like a large population of people that are couch surfing doubled up, bouncing from here and there, staying outside on the streets, that need access to those vouchers too. So I'm just like, wary that people that also need it that are not in shelters are not going to have access to get these vouchers.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah.
Yeah, I could sort of get an answer on that. So yes, you're right. It was mentioned, I think, briefly before, there is a priority or a focus on homelessness and a few other special needs with those 102, and they would be flowing through Father Bill's in Mainspring, those 102. The MRVPs that I mentioned that we had a waiting list open lottery for, there are priorities there as well, but they were open to anyone at that time, but that is closed now. And unfortunately, as I was mentioning, to try to get a housing voucher, we got a decade-long waiting list of people looking for assistance. So to the point that we need more subsidy, we need more assistance. And so you can understand that the feds are trying to focus on a very vulnerable population right now, especially during the COVID emergency, that anybody in congregate living situations. But you're right, it's not just for everybody else, at least not in its first priority.
Thank you. And then one last thing on there. I know this probably is not going to happen, but say that you don't use all those vouchers because, like I don't know, Fall River, New Bedford, the shelter situation is kind of weird. So if there were leftover vouchers because this certain group that you're saying qualify for it now, would that go to the other people that like are in the system as being homeless, but not technically in a shelter?
I don't know specifically, the layers on the difference between being in the shelter and being couch surfing. That gets a little tricky as to the designation of homelessness. My understanding is that you do need to be in the shelter, and that is one of the priorities. But I'm not sure exactly. But if you want to, reach out to us, we can help you find out for sure.
Okay, Thank you, I'll do that.
Can I comment? And DHCD, when they got word of the vouchers, I think it was last month, did a listening session to try to solicit feedback from
Yeah.
people. So they do have some flexibility in the way they are going to set those priorities. I don't believe they've released the results of that, what their decisions were after making that feedback yet. So it's a little hard for us to, to know how that's exactly going to play out.
Thank you. Yeah, I was part of that listening session.
Oh, good, good.
Thank you, Anna, for raising that concern, and Rob and Maureen for your responses. And we'll also make a note of that in our notes, Anna. So other questions, other thoughts of what you're seeing? I think that was Anna, was a really good question, or a really good comment, because despite all the money that's coming in and that we have an opportunity to allocate, we do still have to be setting priorities, and the need may still exceed what resources we have. So I appreciate you raising that and helping us to think through how we do set those priorities. Others on the call who want to share what you're seeing in your communities? It's a quiet group. I totally get that. It's mid-August, and oh, here's Leanne. Go ahead, Leanne.
Yeah, I've asked a couple of questions in the chat, but so I'm the town planner for Middleborough, and we have a 40R bylaw for smart growth overlay for our special town meeting October 4th. Middleborough is not a happy community at the moment because we have the new commuter rail station being constructed, which I would have to say about 80% of town residents do not want. And now with the new housing choice and being an MBTA community, and we're being told that we have to have designated area for affordable housing, multifamilies, which the area surrounding the new train station is our 40R overlay. This is going to town meeting. The blowback from the community is just, it's relentless. This is not, it's not going to pass at town meeting. It's going to fail miserably. So with that being said, what do we do? Do we just sit back and wait until there's guidance and then the state comes in and just takes the entire half mile surrounding the train station and says, well, that's your designated area. You didn't make a choice to do it on your own. This is where it's going to be. And I've tried to explain that if we don't have a designated area, which 40R is, has some advantages to the town, that we lose, we lose grants, and they don't care. They just don't care. So I am like, we had a meeting last night that was, I brought in people from outside of town to try to talk with residents because they're tired of hearing from us in town. But it's tough, and I don't know where to go from here.
I hear your frustration. And I'm sorry, and thank you for the work you're doing there, Leanne. I don't know if anyone from DHCD is on the call, but I'll give you a couple of things that I would recommend. And I believe Avi had to hop off, but number one is, you're right. Right now, everyone is kind of currently eligible for all of those grants. There's a grace period, right? Because the regulations and the guidance are not out from DHCD. So if it fails at this town meeting, as it sounds like you expect it to, there is another crack at that. So not all is lost. But we would love to connect with you kind of offline. I'll ask Lily to put in the chat, and this is for everyone. She has office hours through our Municipal Engagement Initiative program where you can sign up, have a conversation with her. We can kind of discuss what you're facing in your local community and how we either could refer you to some technical assistance, or maybe we can assist you or do some peer-to-peer guidance. So I would encourage you to check out her office hours. If there's not a time on there that works for you, please don't hesitate to reach out to her and find another time. We will accommodate it. But I think this is a good message for anyone on the call, that if you have something you're working on at the local level, specifically around, how do we gather the support to move this forward in our local community, the Municipal Engagement Initiative is happy to help you through that process. I think, Leanne, on your specific situation, we are hearing from some communities that the threat of not being able to access those grants is not a big enough carrot, right? But I think that there is also the planning process, and I think that with the guidance that comes out, hopefully we'll know a little bit more about what that looks like. What is the reasonable size? What is the location? What exactly is it that you're going to be required to do? So hold tight for that, I guess, is what I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments, folks? All right, I'll mention a couple of other resources that we have through the Municipal Engagement Initiative, and then we'll sign off unless there's any other questions. But Lily's already shared with you our toolkit and our office hours. We also offer Affordable Housing 101 sessions. We do them most months. We are not doing it in August, just to give folks a little break, but the next one will be in September. It's a really great place, especially if you're starting to build up your local advocacy groups, or maybe you know people who are interested in affordable housing in your community, but they haven't really delved into it. It's a small conversation presentation format where we'll go over kind of what are all the definitions, what are the various forms of affordable housing. Ultimately, we want residents of communities across the Commonwealth to be as educated as possible. And they're also simultaneously interpreted in Spanish. So if you have folks in your community who could use Spanish translation, we do accommodate that. And if there's other languages, we can work to accommodate them as well. So I would encourage you to register for that or share it with your networks. And then we also have, as I was just saying to Leanne, we have a group that gets together for peer-to-peer sharing called our Making the Case working group, where people who are doing this work at the local level can learn from each other. If you're interested in joining us for that, you can reach out to me or Lily, and we'll make sure to connect you into that resource as well. So with that, I just will leave you all, remind you that, of course, you can always sign up for any of our committees and our housing briefs on our website. All of our committees are open to anyone, and right now they're all virtual, so you can join from the comfort of your own home or desk. And we really do value your input and your opinions in those spaces. That's where we start to dig into policy decisions and programmatic ideas as they move up into our actual policy priorities. So definitely check out our website to join us for any of those committees. And as a reminder, we'll be sending out an email tomorrow with the recording, with our presentations from today, and all of the links that we were sharing in the chat. But again, you can save the chat yourself by clicking on the 3 dots at the bottom of the chat. So just thank you once again to Rob and Maureen, and to all of you for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Great job. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Be well, be safe.